Welcome back to 60 Plus Uncensored. I'm your host, Seb Fry, and today I'm joined by Mike Dwyer, founder of Implana Career, an organization that helps people, especially seasoned professionals, figure out what's next. Mike's work focuses on senior career assessment, opportunity exploration, and building real momentum for the next chapter. If you've ever wondered what your next chapter could look like, or how to turn decades of experience into new possibilities, this episode's for you. Hey, Mike, how you doing? Thanks so much for joining me here today on the podcast.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, well, I'm very excited. You've had quite a career, and you're still out there doing big stuff. And but you might not be a household name. So could you give us a introduction to who is Mike Dwyer and what are you all about?
Thanks. Well, of all things, I tell people to feel free to study the humanities as long as you don't take on big student debt to do it. I'm apparently in a minority saying a liberal arts degree is useful. So I started off as a philosophy undergraduate, and I was doing this monstrously complex advanced logic and all this stuff, and I was okay at it. But honestly, I picked up some computer programming, and in contrast, it was easier. I mean, not that it was easy, but it was straightforward, tangible. So I started in as a tech career. And then you fast forward 15, 18 years, and I realized that I was one of those people who need a master's degree. Some people get an engineering degree, accounting, or no degree at all, and roll through business doing great. For me, I really needed help so that I wasn't just a nerd. And what happened to me in graduate school is I was exposed to economics, accounting, organizational behavior, contract law, all these good things. And I spent the whole number of years basically saying, oh, okay, that's what this is about. And so really relevant to what we're talking about is that my comfort level now is every week I talk to an attorney, an accountant, very often an underwriter or an actuary. And so I'm lucky enough to travel in very professional services. Now, what another moving part or dynamic to this is, that means, I think we all want to help and have some sort of sense of give back. So when I see a senior, I mean, metaphorically, not literally, I feel like I can put my arm around them and say, come with me, let's talk. I know how a lot of this stuff works. I know these emerging skills. I got a cert from AI, my MIT Sloan AI cert like 6 years ago, just to be able to start keeping up and, make steady investments along the way, trying different things. So that brings you, after a lot of different jobs, even a global job, people are always amazed. I spent 9 years in Bermuda. And the reason they're amazed is that I have to struggle with them to make them understand I actually worked. This was real business, reinsurance. It wasn't just palm trees and, while there was some nice coral beaches. So all this comes together, global executive career, honest up through the ranks. Another thing I'd love to get your thoughts on too is I value all work. I really don't like the idea that, only college degrees are okay, or that, to me, my first job after high school was picking up trash for the city of Somerville, Massachusetts. That's just fine, and I still think that's just fine. I could do it next week if I was cutting back to part-time. So I think when you put in all those perspectives, attitudes, and experience, and, shake and stir, out comes some confidence that says, even though the labor market isn't friendly right now, even though seniors don't always know how to navigate, I feel certain that there's things we can do to help the cause. So, one of the things in these kinds of things, Seb, is I love to hear from the hosts too, because you see so many of us, you have your own experiences. Any thoughts from you so far?
Oh yeah, well, first of all, you mentioned that you were a programmer. So I was a programmer, I was a coder. I got my first Apple II Plus when I was, well, I mean, it's the family computer, I guess, but It was like in 1981, approximately. So I was like 10 years old, and I was programming that thing in AppleSoft. So, what kind of programming were you doing, and when, and for who?
Well, originally it was COBOL, just business
COBOL.
basic. Working for I graduated undergraduate was from the University of Massachusetts, and I got a work study job and went to work for the university. Lovely to be in an academic environment, by the way. So I did COBOL, but then I got a little ambition. I moved away from the western part of the state back to Boston, started doing some technology consulting with a small firm, boutique firm. But then I started learning more various languages, code generators, more sophisticated fare. And I spent a couple of decades in the 128 belt. To us, that's Route 128. I know California has some of its own nomenclature around Silicon Valley, not to try and compete with that, but certainly there's a ton of technology firms around Route 128 in the Boston Belt, and I've worked for a bunch of them. And then, like I say, you start moving into the larger consulting roles, get some more responsibilities, but always have followed my heart. Early on, when I say follow heart, went after companies I liked, people I enjoyed working with. At a software house, I was the 11th employee. And one of the things I'd want to do to somebody, if you and I were working with somebody that wanted some advice, I'd be saying to them, do you belong in a little company or a big one? Do you like clarity and structure? Do you like a little bit of adhocracy? Are you an individual contributor? Are you somebody who likes to lead a team? I think we need to figure all those things out about a person to see what the next path is.
Right. I think a lot of people just want a steady paycheck. So, what year was it that you were doing this COBOL programming? Was this like 1967 or something like that? Or when was
A
this?
little after that, by late 70s.
Of the late
Um,
70s. Okay.
yeah. And
All
so
right.
I've actually made generation after generation of computing change from mainframes, to client server to web and to some of the stuff we're doing too. Like I said, um, no, I don't think hardly anyone can fully keep up with AI, but, I went and got my cert and I've been doing, bits of work along the way to make sure that I stay, keep a good hand in it. I think we all use the tools now. Another thing I'd say to seniors is one of the things that is familiar to me and to a lot of people of all ages are collaboration tools, right? Software. I don't care if it's Slack, Teams, Google Suite, whatever. Um, I get people sometimes who come to me and say, I feel like obsolete and this, and my tack is to invite them. Um, what you want to do is, if you don't know anything about Slack, for instance, get a friend, download a trial copy, and organize a golf tournament or a birthday party. I don't care what you do, use the stuff. And in no time, you go from, I don't know what this is, to, these are my first impressions. And that, a few talking points, a little bit of confidence, and the ability to talk further, to me, is a vital change.
Yeah. When I my first corporate gig, I guess, was for British Petroleum, and no, my first big corporate gig, I should say, was for British Petroleum, and they used COBOL, and that was in what year was that? That was like in 1995, 96, and so there was still COBOL there, and I understand that COBOL's in high demand these days, right? I mean, like there's still a lot of systems, and so if you're a COBOL expert, I think they're paying big bucks, which is ironic because when I was there, COBOL was not like a glamorous job, but now it is. Like these ancient systems are still running like a Timex watch or a Swiss watch, even all the years later. So okay, well that's interesting, and I want to talk to you some more about that AI cert that you got 6 years ago. But before I ask you that, I want to ask you about Bermuda. So a lot of people have the dream of like living in a tropical paradise. What's the reality of living in Bermuda? What's that
Well,
like living there for 9 years?
I mean, in general, it was wonderful. I love that it's racially mixed. Nothing's perfect, and there are some racial tensions, but you'll also have neighbors in every community where Black people have freckles. There's intermarriages. One of my favorite things I tell people about Bermuda is if you run into a Trimmingham, that's a jolly-faced English white person. And if you've got an Outerbridge, that's almost certainly a black Bermudian. But I once heard someone refer to a neighborhood and talk about a family and say, is that the black Coopers or the white Coopers? And I love that there was no edginess to it. It's just, which neighbors is this? And another thing that's interesting about Bermuda is that there's a lot of people from the Azores. And so you might have a Gonzalez that owns a window washing company, and you might have a Gonzalez who's an assistant vice president at a reinsurance company. And I just love the mix. There's a ton of business in Bermuda. By the time I got there in 1990, international business had eclipsed tourism as the main, driver of business. And that's just gone up and up. I mean, when I left in 99, there were many tens of billions of dollars of capital in catastrophe insurance, reinsurance, and, offshore, it's a whole other conversation, but offshore does offer some advantages that it's hard to, like if you're doing business in multiple U.S. states and you're trying to insure, if you self-insure, each of those little companies has a P&L and has to be capitalized. If you're buying coverage, rates fluctuate. So you push it offshore and fund it yourself, and it kind of stabilizes. But anyways, a ton of business there. It was good to live, but you are an expat. I know my wife was dutifully reminding me each year that, don't we want to get back to the U.S.? And then there got to be a point where my son was 10 years old, and I was watching him play cricket, and I realized we probably want some little league in the mix. This is nice and everything, and it's good that they've got some international exposure. But I will tell you something I wouldn't feature for everybody, but for the right person, very young, older. You don't want to do this when there's a mortgage and kids in high school, but once you become an expat, you look at the world through a different lens. I mean, I can't tell you how many people left Bermuda with the next location being Isle of Man for insurance or risk, Dubai for some sort of technology job, whatever. So it's an interesting thing. In general, you're away from family and home, but certainly it's wonderful to bring people. I was traveling a lot. I used to give frequent flyer mile round trips out like candy, and have people down all the time. So, but, it's just, Seb, you really want to keep the landscape open that, whether it's a 60-year-old, I got a statistic I ran across recently. What percentage of people on Upwork do you think are boomers? Just take a guess.
45%.
Oh, no. So sorry. 9%. It's
Really?
generally pitched at a younger crowd, but it is by no means lonely or odd for the senior. So if you think about that for a minute, when you start putting all this together, whether it's expat around the world, trying freelance, one of the things, let's talk a minute about technique and just jump in. I enjoy talking with hosts. One of the things that's kind of fun is I think of a monolithic job as sort of the molecule, right? And you did all these things inside of it. One of the things that's interesting reflection work, if you're thinking about freelance or gig work, is you probably got to break off one of the atoms inside that molecule, right? Your job might have been around meeting facilitation, event planning, any number of things. You might have been a scribe, you might have been, whatever. For a freelance offering, you probably want to break down something and find some mapping of what you do and you'd like to do that you're seeing out there in the world that has a pay scale to it. And these things are accessible. It is not hard to get yourself out there in Fiverr or Upwork or something else.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, I was an expat for a while. I lived in Malaysia for a year, and then I lived in Belgium for 4 months. I think it's great living abroad. That's the best, at least for a time, right? It certainly is. very enriching to like step outside your comfort zone and see what people are doing, how they live somewhere else. So, but you said reinsurance, so that's interesting. A lot of people don't know what that is. I do know what that is, but talk a little bit about about the reinsurance, like your work in reinsurance.
What happens is my role was a global technology officer, but I'll tell you what, remember I mentioned grad school and stuff. I mean, I had lunch. I just soaked up all the deal making. I just love to hear about all of it. And so what goes on is this. If you've got some local insurance company, they can handle if a house burns down or, whatever it is, the auto crash. But if you start talking about things at scale, entire neighborhoods. Remember in Hawaii when there was that horrible, wildfire that leveled
Maui,
part of,
right?
right. What happens there is insurance companies understand, their actuaries look at how much capital they have, and they have a sense of what kind of financial shock they could withstand. So what you do is you turn to the next market up and you buy reinsurance. Now, that market's kind of interesting. The old-fashioned, kind of classic version of reinsurance is, let's say you represent Swiss Re, Seb, and I represent Zurich Re and Munich Re and so on and so on. The typical thing is that you'd have a slip. You'd take that cover and you want $100 million coverage in excess of a $10 million event. Okay, that's what you want to cover. You break that up across 20 reinsurance companies. That means that no one of those companies has all that exposure. And when people design this stuff at scale, they're trying to avoid concentration and correlation, right? Nobody wants to be holding the bag when the event happens that, oh, look at that now. That affects 60% of my premium payers. You see what I mean? So it's a whole other market. Typically, it's done through insurers. As I say, they in turn turn to this other market. Occasionally, with giant risks, like Hull. Remember the cruise ship that the captain got a little, too casual. He wanted to show his passengers a great view, and he banged a $2 billion boat off an island and killed some people. That is such a giant event. When you talk about Hull and Marine, for instance, that goes right to a separate market, giant co-ops and other mechanisms. But you could probably tell me some of the examples you knew about reinsurance, but broad brush, that's what's going on. It's a market that's further up the totem pole. It's something that's got more zeros in the end. Obviously, the cat insurance, which is a CEO of a catastrophe insurance company once told me, we're doing great. The earth hasn't shaken and the wind hasn't blown that bad this year. That's how their informal hallway report runs.
Well, I imagine that a lot of these reinsurance companies are getting stressed now, right? I mean, like we have the Maui fire, the one in Southern California earlier. We had the CZU complex fire in Santa Cruz, and then there's the Santa Rosa fire and all the Hurricane Sandy and all this. I imagine that the reinsurance companies are getting kind of stressed these days.
Very much so, and we're hitting some tough public policy issues. One of the things that happened is that, there was a Wall Street Journal article about, how sometimes they call it conspicuous consumption. Some people like to flaunt their wealth. One of the best ways you can flaunt your wealth is to go buy a $10 million home in a place where it's had to be replaced 3 times in the last 12 years. And at this point, there's no longer, flood map or whatever, there's no longer insurance cover available. So you're showing off that I just don't care. I'm buying one of those. So, but that's an interesting to pick up on your point. Yes, I'm no longer as fluent as when I was talking to actuaries every day in the market in Bermuda. But yeah, there's strain on total capacity. And when you think about, what do we do about the homeowner, whether it's the same homeowner or the second and third down the road? What do we do about a seacoast home that has had full value claim 3 times in the last 12 years? Do we keep insuring that? And insurance is spreading risk, so the rest of us are contributing premium. So, some of the thinking is, do we create a pool that sort of at least partially offsets that person and buy it for public space? I mean, talk about TBD. these are that you pick up on a great point that capacity is under stress.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, good to know. I think a lot of people might want to like look into that because it's I think going to be a really d- uh, big problem in the next 50 years or maybe even 10 years, 5 years possibly, right? I mean, like there's a lot going on there in the reinsurance market, I know. And we are many of us are seeing much higher insurance costs, as well we should. I always thought that like home insurance was like very cheap. Now it's a lot less cheap, but still I think overall cheap compared to like the size of, the fact that it's most of your nest egg, right? For most people, right? Your home value. So it makes sense to have that well insured. Okay, so now you have an AI certification from, and here's the key word, 6 years ago. 6 years ago, AI was science fiction. So what are you doing getting a AI certification 6 years ago?
Well, this is a great topic for us. We can bounce back and forth. One of the things you want to do in new technologies, and remember, I've been through cycles, sounds like you too, since mainframes. One of the things that happens is you want to separate. Let me give you a very blunt example. I showed somebody a Harvard Business Review article that I thought was really in depth and relevant about AI, and the magazine was dated December 2024. And this was maybe May of 2025. And the person looked at the magazine and said, at the journal, and said, that's obsolete. And what I'd say to the person is, no, it isn't. There's always sort of primal, foundational, structural things about technologies. I mean, in AI, one of the things that was helpful to me in that MIT Sloan course, which was, by the way, was pitched out of the Sloan, the business school, but the head of the CSAIL, the Comp Sci AI, Danielle LaRousse, was about 30% of the course. So it was cake and eat it too. It was perfect. It was worth the $3,000. But what happens there is that they're helping you think about this stuff in a structural way. Oh, so the components of this are machine learning, natural language processing, robotics, robotic process automation, which is the most slippery. It's the closest to classic process improvement that we know. But that you bring that mindset forward, what you learn about how algorithms are selected, you got to keep refreshing. But when you invest in understanding a technology to some degree, if you pay attention along the way, you can make sure it's not perishable.
Right. Okay. So this AI cert, though, what was the is this is like a broad overview into all AI technologies, or what exactly was the certification
Right.
for?
Well, what it was to it's business implications, and what you were doing is you were writing case studies that showed you opportunities. You could sanitize them. You didn't have to say client B or my company's terrible at. You would find a setting where each of these kinds of things, machine learning, natural language processing, robotics, robotic process automation, could be as simple as, why when you walk into place do you have to fill out a log on the counter? If your employee ID has a picture on it, why can't you walk in to HR or wherever else and have it do the facial recognition? You don't want to participate, go to the other sign in. But if you're comfortable with it, walk up, it takes a picture and it says, oh, Seb, what do you want today? Calls up the particulars about, and you're halfway to business before anything. So, you really want to be looking. There's some really great advice out there about how to manage. There's a favorite author that I always bungle his last name. Maybe we can send it to your listeners some way. His name. He's actually associated with the World Economic Forum and Mercer Consulting. He's got an interesting thing. He has something called return on improved performance. And he'll give you the example of, let's say, Seb, you own an airline. Do you spend money on technology to make the pilot better or the flight attendant? And here's his case study. The pilot already better be near perfect. And if you make them a lot better, no one's going to know it. But if the flight attendant has tech glasses, Google goggles, that say, oh, Seb, good to see you. Do you want your usual drink? That's a return on improved performance. But I love these things. That's why I go to them and why I invest in them, because even though things are ever emerging, if you have a way of ordering and valuing, it's helpful.
So that's super interesting to me, like especially like the computer vision essentially, and like ability to not only recognize people but like objects and all that. Because my understanding, like I got a friend who's she's Chinese and she went to visit home like a few months ago, and she said that there's no more IDs anymore. You don't even need your smartphone anymore. Basically, like you just walk up and like they just all the cameras because it's a police state, right? Everyone's very tightly controlled, but like you don't need anything anymore. Essentially, they know who you are all the time, everywhere, and it's like frictionless, right? So, do you see that happening here? Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? What kind of insights do you have on that kind of thing? Because it sounds like what you're talking about, and that's where we're headed. So, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that one.
Well, we all have to participate. Part of the reason to be comfortable, at least to some degree, with these technologies is so we can weigh in on the public policy. What was a wonderful article in National Geographic about 5 years ago. It turns out Londoners don't mind street cams at all. They don't see it as an invasion of privacy. They see it as, wow, that's going to ensure our safety, and the police would be here in a moment if something went wrong. So you get into some wonderful things. Like if you put a spectrum from the U.S., right? I mean, we have a state with a motto called "Live Free or Die," all the way to the. I can't correct you for calling China a police state, right? Go ask some of the minorities, the ethnic minorities there. Somewhere in that is what we have to manage: the utility of these technologies, and versus where they have decision-making bias in admissions or eligibility or loans. So that's the wrestling match. And I think the more of us who are willing to at least try this stuff. I did yell at some friends a few years ago. I'm at just having how do you have where you are, they call them pop-up shops, where for 3 months in the summer or winter Christmas or something, there's a temporary business. We had a nice craft beer place that came up in the next town over. So picture 4 couples sitting around and somebody starts talking about AI. One guy says, I read an article. A woman says, I asked the IT guy, and I didn't even let him finish. Try it. This is 5 years ago. Download ChatGPT. Try DALL-E 2 to generate an image. Tick the thing on the Google or whatever it is that says, I want to add AI to my searches. Try it, That's my number one thing. And I hope you can see why I want to take my comfort level and share it with seniors and explain, hey, there's a way to get some comfort and fluency. If fluency, at least familiarity, so that you're coming at this stuff not outside looking in.
Yeah, well, also, I mean, a lot of this technology is super, super easy to use. I mean, like back then, like in 1981 with the Apple II and all that, I mean, like it was not super easy to use. It was simple, but it wasn't easy to use. And what we have today, like, I mean, we can thank Apple for this. Like, Apple had the appliance model, right? Like, you shouldn't be opening up your computer and pulling chips out and like putting in new ribbon cables or whatever. It should be an appliance that you use, and it should be an integrated experience, and it should be very easy to use. And I mean, a lot of technology, a lot of human interface design has frankly sprung from Apple's innovation around this. And the result is that many of these systems are incredibly easy to use. They're and getting easier all the time. But you mentioned the thing about the English and the cameras everywhere, and I guess there's more cameras in England than anywhere except for China. And I just can't help but think about George Orwell in 1984, which George Orwell was writing about England, right? And like what he foretold is basically happened, except that there are not forced to be cameras in your houses, although a lot of people do have cameras and microphones all over their houses. And what are the odds that the NSA or whoever can't actually listen in on your cameras and microphones if they wanted to? And I would guess that they could do that if they wanted to.
I agree, and I think most of us simply, we can hide behind the anonymity and scale of it all. But these are the concerns, and we've switched from kind of a career model to kind of a public policy model. But I think, I think those overlap, right? You certainly don't want to rely on a single article you read last year to inform what skills you should be developing at work, what things you should be talking about with neighbors and and whatever in our public policy. I think it makes sense to be familiar with these emerging technologies, but also emerging business models. I mean, you know, you've been around the block. How many times have you seen the cycles, the pendulums? You know what I mean? In business, we got to centralize everything. Oh, no, that was a bad idea. We got to decentralize everything. And the answer, of course, is make the punishment fit the crime. It's a situational ethic. What happens to you is you end up trying to force some sort of global accounting system on a company that offers professional services and medical devices, and it's a stretch. You might be better served letting them each have their own software and write the right interfaces or whatever else, but also on the business model front. I'll tell you, a wicked pendulum is 10 years ago we started seeing the gig economy, and basically the underlying message is you're all serfs. Then comes COVID, and you can get a $1,500 signing bonus for McDonald's. And people hired post-COVID, end of COVID and post-COVID, they hired staff in case they needed them. I had LinkedIn posts I saw that said, no, I don't do anything. I'm a little nervous about it, but I'm getting a decent paycheck, and I suppose it'll pick up. Now we're back to the other end. And I think what happens is, you first of all, if you know that, it helps your mindset. If you know that we go from overcorrection to the other end of overcorrection. But then the other thing, too, I think, is that you really want to be flexible. One of the things I very much argue, have you heard or seen the concept of a personal board, Seb?
A personal board of advisors? Yes, I've heard of that, sure.
Right. Well, I actually go a step further. I tell you to convene them. I tell you the first one should be a pilot because you might not pick the right ones. But, one of the things about this career work now is I'm not sure that, we all want to be the Marlboro man, if you know what I mean by that brand, that the strong, silent type riding under the big horse. But it turns out, if ever you're going to collaborate, I think it's around these things. And to me, the idea of a personal board is I want somebody who knows me. I want somebody who knows this sector. I want somebody who knows technology. Pick 3 or 4. Buy them some bagels every few months. Get them together. And I think the way to use that, but, first of all, since you are familiar with it, I'm sure you can see the power of that. Instead of you just trying to find your own way. Another thing I think you can do is, instead of saying to anyone there, get me a job, I think instead you say, what do you see as emerging? What should I be studying? What company should I watch? If you tell somebody, get me a job, whether it's no matter how nicely you ask it, that's a big project. That's a big ask. But if you say to a group of advisors, how would you position? What would you pursue? What should I be learning? That's a flattering question that you can get some wonderful perspectives on.
Well, Mike, I have to say that I love where you're going with all this because the conversation that we're having right now is really this is a kind of a cutting edge conversation that we're having. Like, this is not a conversation about like the past. It's a very future oriented conversation, I think. And that, a lot of seniors, I think, older adults, let's just say, they seem to have more interest in the past than they do in the future, right? And you yourself seem like you are really right out there on the cutting edge. But I think that, a lot of people who, maybe not people who are 80, but people who are like 60 maybe, or 65 or 70 maybe, they still have a lot of gas in the can, right? But they experience like ageism and, they're told that they're washed up and they don't think they can get a job or find meaningful work or any of that. But like what you're talking about right here is like, all this is like the stuff that I'm reading like in Wired magazine and like, this is all like very, very, like frontline stuff. So how do you do it? And what advice can you give to people who, because I think a lot of people, they retire, and then they retire and they're retired for a couple of years. They needed a little break, right? And then they're like, oh, now what, right? And it's like, I think a lot of these people, they have a lot to give and they want to give, but they don't really know, like, where to begin, or will they feel welcome, or are their skills still valuable? Or, like, can you talk about that at all?
I'd love. And let's talk about a couple. Let's drop down to some detailed techniques. Let's say there was a person sitting next to you just on camera who was, pick that age, 66, right? Right. Thank you. Thanks. Well propped. Thank you, Seb. One of the things we got to be careful is we want to help this person make sure they know how to manifest and use and leverage their experience as opposed to it being a problem. So first thing, no war stories. You never start a sentence saying, yeah, but we used to, right? That's not going to play. One of the other things that happens is your boss might be 27 years old. I remember talking to someone recently, and they had led a seminar that about 60 people were attending about process improvement in our urban government, and I was really impressed. And afterwards, I said to them, do you have an MPP, Master of Public Policy, or an MPA, Master of Public Administration? They said both. So one of the things that 60-odd year has to get used to is that 30-year-old might be crackerjack, well-trained, and the perfect person for this job. Don't fight that. Go with it. How can you help? So my counsel is, when you come up to something that you're trying to do, have your experience inform what questions you ask and what we should be thinking and worrying about, not a harangue. Let me stop right there for a minute. How are we doing? How's our 65-year-old? They getting excited a little bit about, okay, I can see what you're telling us.
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I think they are.
All right. So if you're going at it like that, the other thing, too, is I'm very realistic. Steve Dubin introduced you and he and I do a professional networking. So I developed content, and Steve is just a preeminent networker. I actually tell people that even though I'm a shy nerd, my curiosity overcame my shyness. I actually want to know what you do, Seb, more than I'm nervous. You see what I mean? And Steve is just the epitome of a networker. So one of the things we do is we bounce back and forth. He and I have done a couple of seminars together, one in Rhode Island, one in Mass. Now, here's where we have some fun techniques. Let's take this 65-year-old. What's your career budget? What do I mean by that? How much do you want to work? How much, and you really want to reflect that in, do you want to hit a networking event every other month? Steve will push people to every week. Mike says, you know what? You do 6 or 8 a year, 2 years from now, you're a different person. And part of my methodology is, I want you to be intentional. Do you need to go to an identity group? Because if you're a certain kind of minority or whatever, your sexuality, whatever it might make you want to get support, go to an identity group. On the other hand, if you're an accountant who's scared to death of technology, go take a course. Don't take it online because you want I have this new concept called topical networking. If I can take a course on LinkedIn, or I can go to a community college and meet peeps and a professor, do the latter. You know what I mean? Get wherever you can get people involved. So I hope you can see how Steve and I will work together to say people, yeah, you're going to be thinking about let's be intentional. What can you actually do and commit to? And then do some trial and error. Try a few of these events. I think another important thing is to be realistic about yourself. Turns out, just because you're an introvert doesn't mean you can't be a great networker. There's a woman named Karen Wickery who wrote an absolutely delightful book. It's on its 4th print. And one of the things she says is that introverts have a superpower. They like to listen. And you can organize that. You can use that to your advantage. So let's talk about that 65-year-old person. Steve and I Seb, I get a sense of you already. You, I, and Steve could go to an event where there's loud noise, glasses clinking, 300 people, and we'd start finding people we find interesting and navigate and have a great old time. But if you get somebody who's looking at their shoes saying, oh my God, what am I doing here? Well, let's help them. First thing I've done is I put a little table in my materials and stuff that talks about how do you put your toe in the water. We'll start with a safe, scripted environment. If you go to a lecture or a briefing, library, university, wherever's near you, on a topic and there's a Q&A afterwards, you're safe. You sit there, it's scripted, and afterwards you have a pre-scripted conversational scope, right? You talk about what just happened. Then you sort of move up the food chain where you're saying, I'm actually going to try and go to something that's a little more, free form, a little more navigation. Let me see if I can talk to 6 people tonight. Let me try some things. And then all the way up to, like what I was describing to you, the big noisy room. Hey, let me see, let me go chase around and see who's interesting here. So if you put all that together, some techniques about how to harvest and use your experience, not rub people the wrong way with it, right? No war stories, no harangues. If you use it to position how to help and to spot, ask a smart question or offer to do something that might be some good backfill, if you're thinking about how you can keep learning and growing, meeting people, and you're doing all that stuff steadily, I've developed this great preference for, I don't play hockey, ice hockey, but I love their concept of shots on goal, and it is such an important concept. What it means is, if you take 40 good shots in an NHL team, you might win. That's if you take 20, there's no way in the NHL you're going to win. If you're taking shots from the other end of the ice, too much coverage in front of the net. But if you take 30 or 40 good shots on goal, you might just win this game. And we want to pick, I don't mean 30 or 40 to be an absolute quantum, but we want to pick strategies that we get excited about. You say, that's actually an interesting thing to pursue.
Right. Yeah. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? And well, so much of life is a numbers game, right? So like I personally got out of networking when COVID came around, right? And so like I think my social skills, my networking skills definitely atrophied, and I've been digging myself out this year specifically a lot, going and doing a lot of networking. And, I probably am more introverted than extroverted, but at the same time, I can carry on a conversation. And I'm actually, I love talking to people when we get into good, patter, good, patter, I really enjoy it. And I know that a lot of people are sort of self-conscious, really, about getting out there, really, because, maybe they got older, maybe they put on some weight, or, right, their cut of their clothing isn't very fashionable maybe anymore. And a lot of people feel self-conscious about that, and especially people who maybe want to go back into work. So what can you advise for people who are actually looking specifically to unretire and find not like a Walmart greeter job, but like an actual job that they feel is meaningful and can make an impact? Any advice for those people?
Yeah, I do think networking and topical networking, skills networking combined is the way to go, because we all know what's going on with the bots, the cover letters. I mentioned to you working with the University Career Office. I had a brilliant MBA spread out on a table, 3 different cover letters that stressed, multiple keywords that were in the job. In other words, a very clever approach, and still only get 1 or 2 nibbles out of 70 submissions. If that's not ridiculous enough for you, the latest things I'm reading in the business press are employers protesting about candidates using AI to embellish. So we have a complete game going on. And it turns out there's some clever stuff. What the people are doing is they're putting white font stuff that a human reader doesn't see, but the AI, the bot, does. And so we go. And how much energy do we really all want to put into that game is what I'm saying. So what we want to do is we want to take a different approach that says, I've got to figure out how I can get closer to this thing, eyeball to eyeball, learn some skills, find out what's emerging through networking. And I really suggest that you go about this in sort of an organized way that says, I have a workbook somewhere I got to refresh that says it's Monday to Friday. And on Monday, what you do is you look back through old project files, email and contact lists, and you're looking for things that you did. I actually did a lot of event planning or meeting facilitation. That's interesting. Or, I should really be back in touch with that person, that company. Or, I thought it was an interesting development. Let me follow it. Let me see what's become of it lately. I think those are really good investment in how to harvest your own experience. And then you move that into, then you start your trial and error. You start moving that into, let me take this to the networking world, to my personal board, and let me try it on for size. Anybody think I'm onto something here? Or let me get a little feedback and some help. So I'm hoping that you're hearing that this is a way for you to do something that's authentic, based on your own experience. Start organizing and saying, I think I could and should do some more of this, and then test the waters.
Yeah, and that I think is awesome advice because after with pandemic, we all started spending a lot more time inside and behind screens, and that's depressing, really. So I think that it's really just good advice just to go out there and like if you do go to a networking event, man, there's plenty of people who are at these networking events who are not good networkers. Maybe you're rusty in that department, right? There are people who definitely do want to talk to you because they want to talk to someone, and you just don't know what they have to offer. And a lot of them have really cool things going on, and I think that a lot of them will probably think that you have a lot of really cool things that you had or have or could have going on as well. So there's a lot of value in going out there to meet people. So Mike, what do you do these days? How are you keeping busy?
Well, I will tell you, but Seb, what you just said might be the best thing we've said in this whole conversation. Steve Dubin will tell you that he actually looks for the person who's uncomfortable looking and goes over and gently introduces himself, and he'll tell you, I have a client, one of my longest run client is somebody I met that way. So 3 cheers for what you just said, all right?
Yeah.
Well, the way I've organized things, and this, there's a combination of risk tolerance and appetite and how much energy you have. The way I do things is I have a day job. I have a consulting firm. It's usually just me, but at the moment I have an intern. Sometimes I have an intern and a grad student, whatever, and that's in public pension operations. Very steady, Once you're established, I'm lucky enough to have pretty steady work year after year. And that's the platform by which that funds and informs the career work, but keeping up on emerging skills and all this other stuff in the career hat turns out is not a bad thing for the day job. I think I was with Deloitte Consulting. I did my first workforce analysis on 240 IT professionals. I led a project that was looking at skills development. What do they have? What do they need? And so I've been doing that particular kind of thing since 2003. And I'm really loving the idea of keep that kind of classic workforce, mindset as kind of a consulting mindset, but marrying it to all these interesting things you and I are talking about, emerging technologies, networking, skills development, and bring that to both the day job and the side passion. But I think this is a good example too of, some people, there's a person who's founded something here, an incubator called the Mass Challenge. And he was a keynote speaker at a BU, Boston University graduate thing one time. And he said, I had a great job with one of the big six, and I woke up one Monday and said, I'm not going today. That's it. And he went off and just high risk. Now there's a wonderful contrast that with the way I've done it, this side thing that is companion, ease into it. There's a wonderful artist named Janine Kuo, Kwoh, and she has a business called Quotations, who does special handmade letterpress, letter cards, greeting cards. What she did is, she was corporate, and she rented a letterpress for a couple of years, and then she bought one for a couple of years, and then eventually she made a switch to her own business. So those models of, great things to talk about with your personal board. Am I going to do this thing cold turkey? Am I going to ease into it? Now, for the senior or the retiree, same question really. Do I want to, am I restless enough where I'm just going to try and jump into this full time, full bore? Or am I going to look for small few day projects out on Fiverr and Upwork to get started? All great conversations.
Right. So you have implanacareer.com. And so that's a what? What's the elevator pitch for implanacareer.com?
We do advisory, we do career advisory consulting. You can buy a workbook, you can hire us for a few hours, but it's very low key. One of the things I can reassure the podcast hosts, Seb, is there's no high pressure sales. We're busy. If you want to give us a call, I'm in the process of setting up in Calendly a few 30-minute freebies every month that somebody can just have a chat and get some initial, direction out of me in a grad student type thing. Obviously, if you want a little more help, you could hire, a few hours of us or something. But it's a passion project and it's a side project. I will be updating the workbook I have. That's this 5-day thing. You know what? Working with Steve Dubin, some people are very organized and disciplined, and some people need structure. And so here, imagine a 60-page workbook that I'm probably going to make into 90 or 100 pages that tells you what to do on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, by day, touches on all these things you and I have been talking about, and you can do it at your own pace. So that's kind of what's afoot and what's the latest in this business model.
All right. So for example, hypothetical. So let's just say I retired 2 years ago, and I'm done playing golf, and I've already taken a 6-month vacation around the world, and I want to get back into it, but like my company had layoffs, and like my industry is in the tank, and I want to kind of like reboot my career maybe. Like, do I go to implanacareer.com? Do I sign up for a Calendly slot with you, or what's the first step to take?
Oh, you certainly can do that, but I think the first step to tech is to find a community. Put together that personal board, because you want somebody who says, I'm going to tell you a fast story. I know we're going long on time. My wife bought me a nice drone, like a medium quality, you could actually use it for business kind of drone. And I let it collect dust for a couple of years until I got ashamed. So then I fire this thing up, watch a few YouTubes, and I take some pictures. And it turns out it's actually fascinating. So I show a friend at church, and you know what she said? Would you take pictures of my next social event? Now, if you got any business in your blood, you ought to smell what comes next, right? Whether you get a little 3D printer, whether you whether you have a drone business that checks for the municipality, whether the yellow lines in the parking lot were painted straight, there's just, if your own business is highly mature, highly competitive, maybe you want to branch out. So, whether it's Implana Career or it's that's why you want to pick that personal board across somebody who's got a little bit of radar on emerging stuff, somebody who knows your sector, somebody who knows you, and buy the bagels and coffee or even a beer and get underway.
Well, I really like that advice. Get your your personal board together. That is really smart. That's a great way to start. And I think a lot of people might say, yeah, but who? But I mean, I don't think the who necessarily matters so much as just the fact that you actually get together with some people and start putting some mental energy in that direction. And I think a lot of people would be surprised how much of an impact that could have, not only on their personal life, but on their professional life as well.
That's it. Yes.
All right. Well, Mike, thank you so much for spending some time with me today here in the podcast. If people wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Well, we have a contact, tell us, talk to us page on the implanacareer.com. And that does find its way in between me and an intern or grad student. Usually takes us a day or so, but we do get back to you. And if you do want to chit chat or something, we'll be happy to talk to people.
All right, terrific. Okay, Mike, thank you so much for joining me here today, and I will catch you on the flip side. All right, that's a wrap for this episode of 60 Plus Uncensored. Huge thanks to Mike Dwyer for setting the tone with such honesty and insight. Now, if you like this episode, do me a favor, do Mike a favor, hit the subscribe button, leave a review, and share it with someone you know who needs to hear it. Oh, and by the way, if you do know someone over 60 who's still out there doing big things, living boldly, working with purpose, or just aging on their own terms, I would love to hear from you. Reach out at team60plus.com or join the conversation at 60plus Uncensored on Reddit. I'm Seb Fry, and this is 60 Plus Uncensored, because as we're learning, life after 60 isn't the end, it's just getting good.
Subscribe now.